All right, people, good morning, good evening. All right, I have two guests with me, Tim Jerome, the project management expert out there in the center, and then on the right-hand side of your screen, you see Carolyn Troiano. She is based out in Virginia, and welcome both of you, and a
Good
very
morning.
warm good morning. How are you, Carolyn?
I'm doing fine, fabulous. Had a nightmare of a storm last night, but it blew through and it's gone.
Oh,
Oh,
mercy, mercy.
great. And Tim, how is your morning?
As usual, it's beautiful out here on the edge of the desert. We're actually I'm about 2 hours away from the border to Texas in New Mexico, and we're seeing some of the haze from the fire out in California. The smoke is going that far, but again, it's the season of monsoons. So we come in, it's hot during the day, and the rain takes the heat out about 3 in the afternoon, and we have beautiful evenings.
Hmm.
Oh,
It's
the rain
it's a
already
rough
started there?
life.
Has
Excuse
the
me?
rain started? Has the rain started?
Yeah, they started about 4 days ago, and it just like you have, Kumar. It's sheets, it's curtains of water that you can watch go down the street, and you see half your yard going down the street with the water, and you're
Yeah.
saying, "My oh my, we're going to have fun this weekend." Yeah, it's a different living when you're out in the desert.
Wonderful. All right, let me quickly introduce Caroline, who has came on the show first time. So people, I'm having Caroline Troiano, and she is an FDA expert. She is an FDA compliance for validations with 21 CFR Part 11, which also deals with electronic records and signature, and she also deal with the data integrity out there. Carolyn, would you like to talk more about yourself, about your work, what you have been doing so far?
Sure. I've been in this racket for 40 years. So it's been a long time. And I was in here before the internet, before any kind of electronic systems. When I started out, there were just some smaller lab systems that were coming into the industry. So basically, I grew up with validation in 21 CFR Part 11. I actually participated in the drafting of that and editing it with others in industry and the FDA, and done a lot of work in data integrity. So mostly I've been doing a lot of consulting, training, mainly in business process mapping, analysis, reengineering, some project and program management, compliance gap analysis, risk assessment, mitigation, remediation, and developing full-blown CSV, computer system validation programs for companies, along with 21 CFR Part 11 guidance to help them make sure that their environments were able to meet an FDA inspection or audit. And I do a lot of work, not just in the inspection and audit area with manufacturing and companies in those operational areas, but I also do a lot of work with submissions, working more currently with some companies to help them map out and do a better job on their regulatory submissions and make sure the data that they're submitting is also compliant. So it's kind of been a big mix, but it's been exciting.
Right, right. Carolyn, for the people out there who doesn't understand FDA, how do you like to explain what is FDA, and when you talk about regulations and audit and all those things, how it actually comes together, why it is so important?
Yeah, well, the FDA has oversight, and of course, their amount of oversight and the enforcement, the actions that they take, which are discretionary, are all based on them coming out and doing an inspection or audit of the facility. And it's in their judgment, and that's a key word because it's a subjective judgment on their part as to whether a company is meeting compliance. and they can have citations, Form 483s if it's an inspection. If the company doesn't respond to those, you end up with a warning letter, which is pretty nasty. It's goes to the CEO of the company, and basically it says you'll go to jail if you don't rectify or remedy these violations. So, and they have an extensive power in terms of fines and shutdown. So, classic example being Schering-Plough Pharmaceutical in 1998. They were given a consent decree, which is beyond the warning letter. And they had to pay $500 million in fines. They had to shut down more than one of their plants. And they never really fully recovered. They ended up being taken over by Merck Sharp and Dohme in 2010. So it really puts a company in a very bad position. However, up until about 20 years ago, most companies were petrified to deal with FDA. They would never contact them, engage them. I actually sat through meetings with FDA people and a VP of quality with a very contentious relationship. And that, of course, didn't do the company any good because the FDA sent their best people out to that location. So before 2000, there was really a reluctance on the part of industry to engage FDA. But more recently, people are realizing that engaging them is helpful. You can ask questions, be part of the partnerships where you develop guidance documents in certain areas. Every time a new technology comes out, the FDA has to figure out how to put out some kind of guidance for compliance. And one area in particular was 21 CFR Part 11 with electronic records and signatures. So it pays to be part of the team, and it pays to really ask them the right questions. You don't have to hang your dirty laundry out, but it's always good to get their advice and counsel and do that before they come on site. And always be inspection ready. That's a hard thing to do, but it's what you need to do in this day and age.
Well, let me ask you this. Who is your regular client in this area?
Well, I don't always have a regular client. I work for multiple people at different times. I do different contracts more recently. I have worked as a permanent employee for companies like Merck, Lilly, Pfizer, Wyeth. So I have had that in my past. But more recently, I've been doing consulting work. And right now, I'm working with a large tobacco company, Altria, to help them implement a data integrity program, to do a gap analysis, to look at their business processes, to map them, to do risk assessment and remediation work. So I'm working heavily with them, but I'm also working with another company, Quick Logistics, which is a transportation logistics company, and they deal with clinical trial samples. So they've been basically asked by all of their clients, well, what are we going to do about FDA questions? These are clinical trial samples. They need to be handled in a way with chain of custody and compliance. So I built out a CSV program for them, for their systems, and did an analysis to make sure that they meet 21 CFR Part 11. So in that case, I actually delivered policies, procedures, templates, and all of those things. And I work with a few other clients as well. Sometimes it's only a one-day session where they kind of pick my brain, but then there are other cases where I have deliverables, or I go and advise them certain ways. I did work with a medical device company more recently that needed guidance on actual labeling of their medical devices. So it's a broad spectrum of clients that I deal with. Another one is Veil Vapor, an e-liquid company. And I built a CSV program for them, Part 11 compliant program, but I also implemented an ERP, batch processing, batch manufacturing system. So my coverage, it depends on what the client needs and where I can help out. But mostly it's trying to make sure companies understand what the compliance requirements are and the best way to meet them in a cost-effective manner, because it's all about cost and time and people.
Great. Tim, you have been also associated with 21 CFR and these regulatory compliances out there. How do you see these areas? How important these regulations are?
Well, let's
I'm
go.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Carolyn. Go ahead. You actually can speak to this much better than I can.
Well, it's absolutely critical because in the last 10 years, the FDA has seen every couple of years about a 5-fold increase in the incidences of data integrity issues in their inspections and audits. So these are what I call unforced errors. You've got people in industry who are being forced to do more work with fewer people. They're cutting corners, taking shortcuts, some of it not intentional, a lot of it just human error creeping in. Because of that, because of those data integrity issues that they're seeing, it's because they're not complying with 21 CFR Part 11. They're not complying with good computer system validation requirements. And because of the incidence of that happening, the FDA did come out with the guidance in 2018, guidance for data integrity to clarify what they were looking for. But companies are really struggling with this because they're a culture, typically the culture is very process oriented, very give me the steps, tell me what checks to check off in this list. And that's not going to buy it. People have to have that mindset of quality, compliance, and doing things right the first time. It's a lot cheaper to do it the first time right and not have to repeat or to investigate and go down that rat hole of spending time and wasting time trying to figure out what went wrong. So companies still have not really gotten on board with that. But in more recent years, last few years, FDA has been doing a big push in that area to get companies to come online.
And let me give you a great example of this. I'll give you two examples that I was brought in an emergency situation. Number one, I was working with a major pharmaceutical, and they were angry. They were justified to be angry because with their hardware architecture, right? And their architecture, their computers and servers were changing every 3 or 4 years. And every time you change a test environment, even if it's just moving a cable, you have to validate against that and justify to the FDA that the trial before I move that cable can be identical to the trial after I move that cable. And here they were with a roadmap of servers and computers and switches and networks that were all changing constantly. And they said, we can't do that. And so the conversation back in 2004 to 2007 was, can we take out the hardware architecture and abstract it in such a way that we say this virtual environment is stable and this virtual environment never changes from here to here to here. Can we please, oh please, and having that conversation opened up the FDA to save time and money and people, and it opened up the companies, both the hardware architecture company and the pharmaceutical company, tens of billions of dollars. And this actually took 6 weeks of effort. It was a $20,000 project, and it impacted tens of billions of dollars. This is what we're talking about in Carolyn's world.
Yeah, that's a great example because, in fact, that's one of the issues that people struggle with is they don't understand that in your validation plan, you have to write a plan if you're going to validate. But in your plan, you're going to determine how much testing, what level of testing, what type of testing, based on the size, the complexity, the business criticality, the GAMP5 category of the software, and the risk assessment that you do. Now, you could look at that and in 10 minutes come up with a rationale for the level of testing that's needed or not needed. And you can put a validation plan in place to say, well, we made that change, but guess what? We don't think we need to do any additional testing, or maybe we'll do a little bit of regression testing just to be sure. But you can really cut back on cost if you present your rationale in your validation plan in such a way that you can defend it. And the FDA can tell you, no, we don't agree with you. But at the same time, if got good sound logic behind it and you can defend it, you should be good to go. So, the FDA they're looking for you to explain to them what you did. And if you can explain it in a way that they have to buy into it, then, that's all you're looking for. Just make sure your plan is defensible and that you execute it and carry it out. Even if it says no testing, wrap it up, write a statement at the end saying we did it. We looked at it, we evaluated it, we didn't need any testing, put it to bed. It's very simple.
So what you're saying is the problem is everything changing, and the solution is a bunch of people getting in a room and opening up and sharing information and coming to an agreement where it works.
Exactly. And in the old days, when validation first came on the scene, the IT organizations and companies were developing a lot of homegrown software. So once validation hit, and I remember the arguments where IT leaders of IT organizations wanted to double their staff to be able to validate the software. And it became an empire building type of an exercise. So their interest was just getting more bodies in place. And the fight of the pharmaceutical company, the headquarters, whoever, financial people, was to, do we really need this much? And and obviously because it was new, they had the fear of FDA put into them that, you don't do this and you're not going to comply and you got to give me these people and we've got to spend this money. But over time, I think people have relaxed about that and realized that you only have to do what you think you have to do that you can defend to FDA. So you don't have to go through that checklist of a million things every single time you change a cable. You have to define exactly what's your change control process. So change controls is an important concept because once your system's validated, you put it under formal change control. And then you don't make a change until you evaluate it, determine the potential risk of failure of the system if you make that change. And then you test that the change works and you do some regression testing to show nothing else was adversely impacted in doing that. So change control is important because that's where you define through your change control procedure what steps you're going to take to evaluate the change and then just document it. And if you document it and you defend it, that's really all you can do. But you don't have to be afraid of what else could I do, all the possibilities. And that's where I think a lot of people get hung up because they're afraid that they're going to miss something.
Right. You also do the training, Carolyn. So, I mean, do you also do the audit, or you train people to perform audits?
So one of the webinars I do is in how to prepare yourself for an FDA inspection and how to conduct one of those, how to work through them. Another is how do you audit your vendors, your hardware, software vendors, service vendors. So those are two types of training I do, but I actually do audits as well. I've participated in audits at different companies, and in some cases I was in the war room where we were gathering information and documentation. And in other cases, I was looking at audit results for a company to just see where they were unable to defend themselves to FDA and why, and what they could do better next time. So it's kind of a whole gamut of activities that I've been involved in. And it also depends on the company, the culture of the company, the risk tolerance of the company, the willingness to hold people accountable. Is it a culture of accountability? Or is it a culture where people are living in fear and just being very mechanical in the way they approach their job and give me the checklist, I'll mark it off because that's the way I cover myself. And not thinking critically, not thinking out of the box, not thinking about what makes sense. I mean, I look at CSV and I call it common sense validation because that's the approach you need to have. A common sense approach to everything you're doing. You can't possibly think of every risk to every system. You can't possibly think of every way something can go wrong, but you've got to at least do some due diligence in understanding what are the things that likely could happen, and what are the scenarios that we ought to at least look at and test for, and kind of limit it there. You can't spend your entire life doing validation work. It's like the analysis paralysis that people get into. But because they don't have that ability to say, you know what, we do have a certain level of risk tolerance. We're willing to, as long as we can defend what we did, we may not fly through an inspection. They may catch us and say, you should have done this other thing. But if you have something in writing documenting what your rationale and thinking was and what kind of investigation you did, you're a long way there for FDA. It's done and it's documented. They can disagree, and maybe you have to do some remediation work, but it's a whole lot better than spending those billions of dollars up front just to prepare for every possible case. You just can't do that.
Mhm. Right. So if somebody has to take a training, if somebody has to look upon you for the training and education part, what sort of topics do you generally teach?
I cover the computer system validation, 21 CFR Part 11, data integrity. I'm also doing one on SDLC modernization, where the FDA is now undergoing a modernization of their own technology, way behind everybody else in industry. They're usually about 10 years behind. But it's an approach where in industry, we're looking more at automated testing so that we can improve validation and actually do continuous validation. Because of the automated testing, every time you make a change, the automated testing runs and you're basically validating continuously, but it's not requiring all the people and the documentation to go along with it. So there are ways that companies are trying now to get themselves out of this business of not being able to keep moving forward. One of the things in the last 10 years, 12 years, is that FDA has found that the medical devices that have failed, 80% of medical devices that have software associated with them and that have failed are due to patches to the software. And this is where a lot of companies, medical device companies, went with these massive bodies of people doing software development for them on a continuous basis and constantly through agile methodology, updating and updating and updating, every day. And because of that, also engaged resources that have no idea about compliance or FDA. So you're laughing, Tim.
I see it happening. I see it happening.
So, and because the devices were failing, the FDA looked at it and said, what's going on here? And it turns out none of these companies that were developing the software had a standard software development lifecycle methodology. They didn't have a structure. They didn't have requirements to standards to follow. So the FDA embarked on doing something with industry to kind of approach that, figure out how can we develop a standard methodology that people would be able to not only be able to do it, but it would be cost effective. I mean, that's the biggest double-edged sword is you want to be compliant, but you've got to be cost effective to stay in business. So they have been doing that work, and they've actually been working with, I believe it's a pilot with about 9 different technology companies, even including Apple. And they're trying to develop a standard and a guidance that industry can follow to keep these software failures from happening. So a lot of what comes out of, usually FDA is behind in terms of technology, and a lot of where they go with their guidance documents has to do with the trends that they see in industry when they're doing inspections. Now, a lot of companies now are moving into cloud services, but we haven't seen any real warning letters or even any sort of trending looked at in terms of how many companies are failing their inspections because of their cloud service provider and not having the documentation they need to support their use of it in a validated environment. So that's probably coming in the next few years, because I can imagine a lot of companies are just going to say, it's a cloud service provider, I can't do anything. And ignoring the fact that you can do an installation qualification. You're just not going to do it the way you did it on an on-premise server. You're going to do it something completely different.
And
So,
the problem is, it's not a tactical issue, it's a strategic issue, because
exactly.
you have that problem, and on top of that you also have something called chain of ownership. And when you have a cloud, who owns the document? Where does the document reside? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, and you know, that's another thing I struggle with and trying to explain to people is that if you create a document or a piece of data, you own it. So if you did it, you own it, and you are the owner of the system where it's housed. Now, the steward of the system and the steward of the data or document is whatever technical resource is providing the maintenance and keeping it in a validated state. And what I'm finding more and more, IT organizations internally and even vendors and contractors don't get that they are the system steward. And the owners don't get that they're the owners of this stuff, and they have to have oversight over these system stewards to make sure they are doing due diligence. I had one recently where the people who were users didn't have any clue how their data was archived, how it was backed up. So they didn't have a way of saying, we know we have a backup copy, which is required for data integrity compliance. And the metadata, what's metadata? So, and that's critical in meeting 21 CFR Part 11 to have all that metadata available.
And this is beautiful, Carol. Now this isn't just pharmaceutical. Think about legal, and chain of ownership and chain of evidence, and all of a sudden this connection of electronic identity. And think about yourself in a conference room talking to a Supreme Court judge and talking to a company and having to bring Amazon Web Services in there, and Amazon Web Services saying, why am I here in court? And this is the impact of the change of technology.
It is. And another example is in working with a tobacco company about 10 years ago. And they were just being regulated by FDA 2009 through the Tobacco Control Act. And the head of IT said to me, and they were used to lawyering up and dealing with legal issues. And I said, well, how are you going to explain something if it's not documented? He said, I'll just sit and I'll take the stand and I'll swear that it was done. I said, you didn't even be given that opportunity. You know, it was a whole mindset change. And he really believed that, you know, you got the lawyers and you swore in court and that you were good to go. And I said, no, I don't think so.
Doesn't work that way. Nope.
No. Luckily,
Wow.
I think he's prepared since then. So
yeah, and again, this is a cultural change. This is like trains changing from carrying people to carrying goods. This is what we're going through right now, where airplanes are transitioning from carrying people to carrying goods, and it's a cultural change that we're having to look across multiple industries. And
right.
Carolyn, you're right on there, and you've seen an entire multi-generational experience of this. Is there any common thread that has been one component? Like the FDA says, you know, in software, it seems like patches. Is there one common thread where you found the problems? And is there a common thread where you found the solutions to these problems?
The common thread is really a lot of unforced errors, human error. And a lot of it is not that people don't have the policies and procedures in place. They have them, but they haven't really been effectively trained in them. They know that they're there. They go through some online training, but they really don't understand exactly. They know what step to do, but they don't know why. So the common thread is the why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to prove by doing this? What is this getting us? And people don't ask why enough. They just go ahead and do it. And another example was, it depends on the company's risk tolerance. If you're working for a company that has high tolerance for risk, they're not going to have a culture of accountability. They're not going to be making sure that everyone is doing what they need to do the right thing right the first time. They're making sure that everything's done better, faster, cheaper. They're cracking the whip and everyone's going. And in a culture like that, you're going to have people living in fear. They live in a culture of fear. They're afraid to be accountable and admit to a mistake. They're afraid to point out something they see going on somewhere else in the work environment and bring that to someone's attention because they don't want to deal with the trouble. So it's that not asking why, but then the culture not being able to allow the person to do that. So what I tell people when I train with them is that think about the culture you're living in your organization. Are you free to speak your mind? Can you give voice to what you're seeing around you to make that difference? Because everybody wants to make a difference. They want to point out where there's something that could be made better. But most of them have been beaten down to the point where they don't have any idea how to do that because in their environment, it doesn't get them anywhere. They just get berated for it.
So one of the prescriptive advice you could give to corporations is leaders. You don't just support whistleblowers now. You have to protect them.
And it's
That's
not
a huge statement.
Yeah, and it's not just the big whistleblowers. It's just that mindset that everyone should be thinking critically about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that's really one of the things I try to bring to my training is explaining to people, not just here's what you have to do to comply. You can go read that in a guidance document or a book, but explaining why it's important, why it matters, and understanding what you can do if some scenarios, what happens if this doesn't work, how you deal with it. And I do a lot of anecdotal speaking about different experiences I've had where people have done something and in many cases it took more time, effort, and money to correct something than to do it right the first time, but they learned from it. So the solution really is in leadership and having that vision of, everybody runs around saying, oh, diversity, and we show 5 people on a website homepage and they all look different. Well, yeah, they look different, but they're only in that organization because they think alike. So the organization is only attracting people and is only able to keep people as long as they all think alike. That's a culture I've seen over and over again. Every company has diversity training and it's all about looks and it's got nothing to do with thinking. And the diversity of thought is the biggest value a company is ignoring and not taking advantage of. So that's another piece that really needs to be changed.
And leadership, and you're talking about leadership that is not just leadership. Everybody understands how leadership functions, and everybody exhibits and embraces the leadership mindset.
Right.
And this is a huge topic that we're having in the education arena.
Yeah.
It's not just leadership is not just something that you learn how to be a manager on. Leadership is a mindset that everybody, top to bottom, embraces.
I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked for where I was sent to leadership training and it was basically it was management training. It's like I always say it's like being on a horse track and the manager is the jockey cracking the whip and the horses all have blinders on and they run and if they don't, they get trampled. And that's how managers operate, better, faster, cheaper. Whereas a leader realizes there's a better way of doing things. You don't have to run around a track. You don't have to have blinders on. Take the blinders off and see where you can run over there and do a better job of something over there, doing different work, different tools, different strategy. But they don't free up the individuals. They won't let them take the blinders off. So as long as people have the blinders on and they're forced to think alike, I mean, I was told, literally told, I mean, I do speak my mind. And I was told that when I walk in the door of a particular organization, I put on my company hat and I do exactly what they expect me to do in the way they expect me to do it, speak in the language that they expect, and be a company person. And, you know, they're wasting a lot of talent. They're not getting their money's worth. They're spending billions and billions of dollars on people and wasting 90% of the people's capability because they're not taking the blinders off or letting them take their blinders off. So it's something that someone at some point is going to recognize that, you know, if we do take those blinders off, we might be more successful. But until somebody takes that first step and organizations start to change, it's going to be a time period, and I don't even know how long that's going to take. But the pain has to be good. It has to be great enough.
So to give you a good time scale, Carol, when I've seen these cycles, generational cycles within old corporations. You have
Right.
too, and the leadership culture is established top down, and once that hits, it's going to be there for 5 or 10 or 20 years. Now, extend this out to a country and a country's leadership. All of a sudden, you're not talking about centuries, you're talking about millennia. And this is not a business problem. This is a problem of people and how people work. And I think we're hitting up against not a problem to be solved, but a dilemma to be balanced. Because there has to be some management. There has to be some measurement and inspection. That's the quality control. But also there has to be some continuous improvement and quality assurance, which is the leadership part. And they have to feed into each other and work very, very carefully together. The old corporations are big enough to where they can separate the management strata, the management levels, and say this level of management does the management, this level of management does the leadership, and here's the communication. But when you have a small business or a vendor, everybody does everything. And that's where your education can become very, very impactful.
And the one thing that's missing, if you know, everybody talks about teams. There's no coach. And I proposed, I had an organization of 130 people, and I decided that I had 5 people who were managing other people, and I wanted to pull one out and call them a coach, and then have the others work as managers. And they, at the lower level, they bought into it, but above me, no, we're not having any of this. You're going to just stop doing that nonsense. So it made perfect sense to 130 people, but the ones at the top didn't agree with it.
Yeah.
So
and one-off projects like this, you can get away with it. 3 projects, you can't. You have to have some type of demonstration of benefits and value over time, where leadership starts really attending to that.
And that's tough too, because I had a case where I was given a set of objectives for the year, which a lot of people are given a set of objectives. And I went above and beyond that and came up with this one way that was going to service our clients in a much better manner. It was simply to do business process mapping and understand what they were doing. The business loved it. They couldn't get enough of it and wanted to expand it. And I was actually demoted that year, because I went and did something outside the box. And I was told that it was a pattern of my inability to stay focused on what I was supposed to. I delivered everything I was supposed to, but because I went beyond that. And don't you know, I could not find anyone in a leadership position to be a sponsor for that effort. They all looked at me like, okay, I was toilet paper on their shoe. So I just, Didn't stay in that organization very long. But it's one of the lessons, even when you do try to take that stand and try to, you have to know what kind of culture you're in. And there, it would have been like beating a dead horse. So it's time to move on and go somewhere else and see where else I can do that. But it is tough. And in the larger corporations, it's extremely tough because everyone feels like you're challenging their territory, you're challenging their authority, and not recognizing. I can actually remember sitting in a room with people in the supply chain area of the company and telling them, I had 1/3 of the IT people under me. And I said, we have a strategic plan. I'd like to share that with the rest of you, because they didn't have one. And I was pulled aside and told that I was in sell mode. I was trying to promote myself. I said, I'm not trying to promote myself. I'm trying to help people. And I was so blown away that they actually had the effort that they took to get me aside and have somebody talk to me, the CIO talk to me. And I thought, gee, I'm not that interesting. Just take the damn strategic plan and see if you can do something similar to that. Or tell me if it can be, I even said, tell me if it can be improved. I'm all ears. This is not something that I'm the only rocket scientist here. So, but it was, and that was in, oh my God, that was in the mid-90s, where women didn't speak up in organizations. So I was in a room with 12 men, and I was considered an upstart. I was trying to take over the world. If they had looked beyond themselves, because their behavior would have been, I wouldn't give up my strategic plan to somebody else and help them. I'm not here to help anybody. And they couldn't see that I wasn't thinking like they were. So it was an interesting phenomenon that I experienced back then.
And it's not,
but it'll change over time.
Yeah, it's not uncommon either. Another example is the military, with incredibly firm structure and channels and chain of command and all that kind of stuff, right? And the leaders who really were good leaders actually stepped out of the box and created the environment so that the teams could be flexible enough to respond to what was on the ground. And the leadership, if you look at like 15 or 20 really good generals across all of the military, in the Western civilization, they go back to a series of philosophers and strategists, and it all has to do with, number one, you can fight each other and you can compete and you can run a race and say, I win and you lose. And that's called, in strategy, that's called a zero-sum game. There's a finite bucket of win, and here you get some and here I get some. Okay? Now, there's an infinite game, which is called the non-zero sum, which means, number one, we're not working in isolation. We're collaborating. We're sharing information. We're exposing our weaknesses and strengths. But it means if I'm a hunter, I'm not going to bring home just 1 or 2 rabbits for my family. I can get 2 or 3 hunters together, and we can bring 2 or 3 or 4 deer together, and we can have a party for a week. Now, this is the transition model that you're talking about, Carolyn. Yeah. This is the strategic change. And we've been talking about this for 3,000 years in Western civilization. And again, this, like we were talking about the difference between management and leadership, this balance between the zero-sum and the non-zero-sum game seems to be a dilemma. Because we need some metrics to measure. And because I'm a human being, I compete. But at the same time, the competition is always overcome by collaboration. Collaboration always creates the breakout businesses. It's
Mhm.
we called it in the mid 2000s. We called it coopetition. You work with your competitors to open up a new market, and this was they were talking about this as um, as innovative in the corporate structure I was in, and I was thinking, well, didn't they do that in the Mediterranean back in 1200 BC? And it's fascinating because, like Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but boy, oh boy, does it rhyme. And we're back to that whole model. It's fascinating that we come back to these themes over and over and over again. Number
Well,
one,
you got Yogi Berra saying deja vu all over again.
exactly, and we're still struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, like quality assurance, Phil Kirby, the four absolutes. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And quality is not inspection. Inspection
Right.
captures mistakes, and that's not doing quality. Quality is investment and strategy. It's proactive,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fixing things before. And like we talked earlier in this show, it's not done from the top. It's done from the top, bottom, sideways, all over it. It's something that's integrated into the mindset of everybody. And we forget this. we find culture as this, and this is what blows me away. We find culture as so stringent and so constraining, but at the same time, if the owners of culture understood the mechanisms of culture and the value of culture, they could use the very thing that constrains them to open up the opportunities. And that's where we have to have not just leaders and followers in companies. We have to have this collaborative environment. We have to.
Well, the best leaders that I've seen are the people who take an interest in understanding who their people are individually, and their
True.
weaknesses, understanding how best and most effective they can be used in the organization. And I worked for one guy, Jack Simpson, was terrific. This guy, he picked people. Say, I like people that are a little off center and people that were quirky. So I fit in really well in that organization. But it was like he knew how to best use resources. He knew how to motivate people, how to make people feel they were making a difference, how they were valued. And it was an innate quality he had for this. And I rarely see that in industry. I rarely see someone with that ability. And he was not considered, he was a vice president level in a corporation, but he would never have gotten any further because of his way of dealing with things. And it was a crazy kind of an environment in our group, our team, but we had fun every day. And we got a lot of effective work done. And because of his leadership. And I'm so grateful that I saw that as a model of what it can be, and understand where people are falling short of that and not doing the things that he did.
Certainly, these are the leaders, Caroline. Certainly. Let me ask you one question. We are running short of time. We are left with another 10, 15 minutes. May I ask you on the FDA part, Caroline, since the pandemic hit uh, in January 2020, what changes have you seen with relates to FDA? Has FDA authorities been a little flexible, and what sort of flexibility that you see? I mean, how did they reacted on this pandemic?
Well, I think a lot of resources in FDA are focused on COVID-19 and focused on solutions and dealing with all of that stuff. And there are certainly a lot more drug submissions. We've seen regulations loosened so that there can be more faster to market products. So I think FDA is really focused on a lot of that. In the submission world, people are responding and trying to submit things and not have to go through. I think they're questioning all of the various hoops they had to go through in the past and trying to streamline things, make things better in that sense. And I think we'll have a more streamlined submission process as a result of all this. As far as the inspections and audits, a lot of it has to do with how many resources and what kind of budget does FDA have to do the inspection and audit. And so that's right now, it becomes difficult to do an on-site inspection. It becomes difficult, particularly in a global market where they were already stretching their resources thin by going to the big producers, China, India, Brazil, other countries in the world where they're making APIs, for example, and 80% of APIs made there, and 40% of finished drug product. So they're out there stretched in resources, and now they can't even go on site in most places. So it's creating a different approach to how to do audit and inspection. And I have not yet come across a company that's been inspected in these last few months. So I'm not sure how they're doing it, but it would seem to me that a lot of it would have to be by correspondence, by email, by Zoom meetings, interviewing people that way. And that can be just as effective because it comes down to looking at their documentation and asking the right questions. But with COVID-19, you see a change in people looking for a different way of doing things. And it's kind of, it's a breath of fresh air for me. This whole thing, as bad as the pandemic is, it has made people think differently. And that's something we haven't seen in a long time, something out there that has forced people into a different mindset. And what I find too is within organizations where they were pushing paper around a lot, now they realize we have to be electronic. We have to have electronic records and signatures. We have to comply with 21 CFR Part 11 and have our systems validated. And so a lot of companies are pushing more in that direction internally to be able to cope with it. And I think it's all a good thing because when electronic records and signatures came out in the 90s, most companies couldn't wait to go paperless in their labs, in their manufacturing areas, everywhere. And then when the guidance came out in 97, they were befuddled by it. They didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know how to comply. They were afraid, really afraid to do something wrong. And so for a good 10, 15 years, a lot of companies just hesitated and didn't go into paperless environments. And then around 2010, they started to move in that direction. FDA had unleashed a bunch of white papers and guidance documents, the 2003 scope and application guidance, and that just muddied the water more. The 2003 guidance contradicted what was in the 97 original guidance. So people were really hard up to figure out what are we doing here? And then people just said, you know, we don't have a choice. We've got to move forward. And, you know, we'll just take our chances. And companies started moving. In the last 10 years, I've done a lot of training in 21 CFR Part 11. But again, people approach it, what do I have to do to be compliant? And well, first you have to think for yourself. Use your common sense. That's something that people don't think is part of the formula, but it is. It's a big part of the formula. You can take, because the FDA tells you what they expect you to do. They don't tell you how to do it. They never will tell you how to do it. So you have to look at the what, and you have to think of how can I do that in a way that's the most cost effective, makes the most practical sense. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it's got to be something that's documented and that I can defend. If I can document and defend something, then I need to move forward with it. And I need to be able to feel confident in front of FDA. And a lot of it is confidence, just speaking to them. You know the subject matter material. You have the confidence that you made the right decisions. Let it stand and see what happens. But companies are finding they have to do the electronic right now. And I've seen some of them where they've actually had someone take a Word document and type their name on it and say that's a signature.
Digitization was anywhere there. I remember I've been closely working with IT software development projects out there. I mean, yes, I mean, I've been hearing this digitization word for almost a decade now. It's just that the pandemic has fast tracked that. It has actually
Mhm.
left with no options for the people either to adopt or,
But
get
but
lost.
it's funny
Yeah,
though, Kamar. It really is funny because yes, the technology has changed, but I'm not so certain that the problem has changed
uh-huh.
because we have a what and a how. And what you're telling me, Carolyn, is missing is what and how can be communicated, but we're not doing an effective communication of why. And
Exactly.
why will allow the workers to actually do the work that does the compliance, and why will help the FDA understand why these changes have to occur, and why the companies are trying hard to work with the FDA to actually meet these compliance guidelines. So we
Yeah.
have a what and a how, and it's like I said, it's easy to put that in paper, but it's the why that we got to figure out. And
And
whether
since
it's a paper document or whether it's a technical electronic document, this bridge has to be crossed.
Hmm.
it's very important to ask question that relates to why. I mean, yeah, as Carolyn mentioned, many of us do not get into the why part. People more often get into how and what. I mean, it's an irrelevant question, isn't it? The first question should be why. I mean, why FDA is so important? Why system validation is so critical? Why has to be answered, and people
And,
should
and,
ask.
and the problem is, if
Hmm.
if a worker does not know why, it's going to be a mechanical process, and people being people are going to make mistakes. And if they realize that the whole company's business is on the line and missing this piece of your job, and you can actually use that as some type of motivation. Hey, your 5 minutes here are going to make or break this corporation. And all of a sudden, that person feels valuable. And all of a sudden,
Hmm.
their participation is not just in filling out a checklist, is I'm saving this corporation every day. And that's the difference between somebody who just goes to work, makes a few mistakes, goes home, or somebody who really focuses in their work and does it right. See, yeah,
And
why is the thing that's skipped? Because we don't have time for it anymore. Go ahead,
my,
Carolyn.
as a kid, whenever I asked why, or my father said, "Why is a crooked letter?" And I still don't understand exactly what he meant by that. It was just a distraction, so he didn't have to answer it. Um, but also, I think people think there's only one how. There's only one right answer, and there isn't. There are so many different ways to do things that people don't understand. Like, just tell me how. Don't tell me I have to think of how to do it. Tell me
Don't
what
waste my
the
time.
how.
Don't waste my time. Tell me how I'll do that and I'll finish the job, isn't it?
Exactly.
Leadership is not easy, and being a follower or a leader, it done well, is incredibly difficult and a lot of effort.
Yeah. And
No, yeah, go ahead, Karen.
well, I was just going to say that even with the how, people want to be told exactly step by step. But one thing I can tell you about leadership is that there's leadership if you know what your strengths and weaknesses are and how you add value to an organization based on the strengths, and you're willing to ask other people in the areas where you're weak to help you. And a leader promotes an environment where people work that way. We all fit into this group, but there are strengths and weaknesses, and we have to help each other. We're here to help each other. And that's
Boy,
the most important thing.
we could talk about that all day long, Carolyn. This is
I
this
mean,
is an
I think
incredibly
Tim,
important topic.
yeah, Tim has picked up the right word for people not getting into why part is as they go mechanical, the entire work goes mechanical. That's the right
Yeah.
way. Yeah, absolutely. I agree to that. All right. I can take two short questions, Caroline, related to your FTA and system validations. Well, 60 minutes is up, but I think quick two questions we can take. All right, these are coming from the viewers out there. Uh, Ram is asking questions related this FD and system validation. Is it a process more mechanical or is it a process more automated? Are there tools which does this job?
There are automated test tools. Not many companies are using them. Some of the software development companies tend to use them more, but there are variety. It depends on what code you're writing in and what kind of tool is available for that particular code. But there's a plethora of tools out there, and it's a matter of adopting one, knowing that it works, because that's the other piece. If you're going to automate your testing, the tool itself has to be validated, and you have to be sure the tool is always going to work consistently and the right way. But there are many out there, but most companies have not gotten there yet, at least unless you're in the business of developing software. You generally don't use a lot of automated testing.
Are these tools being validated or authorized by the authorities out there? Is there
No.
any tool? No.
No, and that's a good point, because a lot of vendors will tell you, oh, buy my software, it's FDA compliant or it's 21 CFR 11 compliant. There is no such thing. They can provide you with a tool, but you have to, as an organization, make it compliant. You have to validate it. You cannot have anyone come in and do your validation for you. They can do the installation and operational qualification protocols, and they can write them and they can execute them as long as you have oversight and sign off on it. But as far as performance qualification or user acceptance testing, your subject matter experts must be doing it and acting in a way they would on their day-to-day job using the system in their environment, and only they can execute it. So there are a lot of vendors.
Yeah, that's a good point. Viewers who are seeing this, please make a note. There's no such tool which is being authorized by the authorities out there. Please don't believe unless and until you see it yourself, you validate it yourself.
Right.
That's a good point. The other question Samantha is asking on this: once a company fails the compliance regulations, what is the process beyond that? What happens after that?
When they
Yeah,
fail,
once a company, yeah.
on-site inspection, they will do Form 483, which is a citation for out of specification, out of compliance findings. And again, that's subjective, so that's their subjective opinion. So they will write those up, and at the end of the inspection, you'll get a letter from FDA, which will include those Form 483s for however many you have. And then you have 15 days or so to respond. But you have to respond in a responsive way. You have to give them, here's our plan for remediation, here are our targets, and they will follow up on every one of those targets to make sure you're covering that. If you don't respond, that's when you get the warning letter. Or if the issues they find are so egregious while they're on site, they may issue a warning letter. They may even issue a consent decree after inspection. It depends on how bad things are. So, but it's typically the Form 483. And a lot of companies look at it like, well, they're going to have to give us some Form 483s because they have to earn their living. So let's give them the easy ones, almost like getting a speeding ticket, because you can respond to it. You try during an inspection to respond to those issues while the inspector's on site, and be able to give them evidence or some way of ripping up the ticket, so to speak. Can't always do that, but you're going to get some Form 483s. You should expect a few, but they generally are things that are easy to fix and remedy. But you have to stay on top of it, on target and on time, to get those remedial actions in place. And the FDA will be looking at things where, look at their recent warning letters. They're out on the FDA.gov website. Go out there, look at warning letters in the recent years and see where they're finding errors. And you'll find a good portion of them relate to data integrity. So look at what the trends are, because that's where FDA is going to be focused. They've found a lot of stuff, and now they're going to be looking for more and expecting more.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Since today's time's up, we need to come again.
Sure.
Yeah,
We need to circle in again.
This would be fascinating. Oh, Carolyn, this is a real joy to be having this conversation.
For me too. Otherwise, I have to have it with myself all the time.
What are you doing, Carolyn, in this lockdown? May I ask you this? How is your day's plan?
How is my
during
day's
this
plan?
lockdown? Yeah.
During COVID, mostly, I'm working from home. I'm doing webinars. I'm doing some conferences. I have a conference with a group for European and Asian market 3 days later in the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, which is exciting. It's an e-compliance conference. And I was at the first one last year. It was the first annual. It was in Hyderabad, India. And this one is a virtual one. So it's with compliance trainings. And a very good group of people, and I'm a keynote speaker there. I'll be talking about SDLC modernization. But my day, I'm always preparing for new topics. I'm always researching what FDA is doing, what industry is doing, talking with, networking with people. Your network is your best source. I really find a lot of good information, good contacts. I use LinkedIn mostly. I don't go out on social media beyond LinkedIn. But my dog does. My dog has his own Facebook page. Goliath is a smart dog. Google him. He knows several hundred items by command. He knows colors of items. So he's a very unique dog. I'm writing a children's book series about him. Goliath loves to learn. Colors and sizes will be out in a few months.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Come to his book signing. You'll get a autograph from him.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I'm busy.
Yeah, I'll be waiting for that. I'll be eagerly waiting for that. All right. Thank you so much for being on this show. And we certainly would like you to come back sometime next week. The sooner the better is. Thank you so much. Ten, thanks so much for making this happen. So
coming out of the desert.
Yeah. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate this, and we'll do this again very soon. Very soon.
Yeah, and people who are listening and seeing us here, please do send your comments, your questions related to FDA system validations, 21 CFR. Carolyn, I can guarantee Carolyn will have a solution to your questions out there. Send it through. We have our email ID, hello@jonaacademy.com, and we'll take those questions with Carolyn, and we'll find an answer. We'll get back to you. Thank you so much for listening, and everybody enjoy the day, and thank you. Take care. We'll connect soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.